Hi everybody, welcome to this week's edition of Property Chat with James Alexander. My name's Ken Hume.
And I'm James.
And this week, the complex subject of leasehold. We're going to try and explain to you. Stand by. Well, welcome everybody, and welcome back, James. Congratulations on your degree.
Yeah, thanks. Nice to be back.
Talking about leases, so we've got a few questions and answers, and we hope that this helps you understand what can be a very worrying and daunting subject, frankly.
Yeah, so we're going to start off with kind of why leases are there, why do we actually need them. So do you want to kind of clarify what their actual use is?
Okay, so imagine that, probably the easiest way to explain it is imagine that you have a large house and you own the whole house and the gardens within it, and it's just you live there, it's your roof, it's your front door. That's typically a freehold premises. Now if we flip that around, imagine that same house but now converted into 4 flats. Well, of course, now you can't own all of it, you only by definition own a part of it, and that means we need agreements to make sure that everybody has a right of way through the front, that the front is cleaned and cleared regularly, that the roof is maintained, who's going to pay for that. And that's what leases are there to do, to make those decisions and make sure that there's a fair proportion paid by all of those who occupy a building.
So on to service charges and ground rents. Obviously they tie in with the whole leasehold.
Yeah.
How do they?
Yeah, I tell you what happens. There are two different things and they're distinct from each other. On the one hand, we have ground rent. Ground rent is fixed within the lease, so you can read your lease and you can see exactly what that amount will be. Generally that's fixed. It could be anything from what we call peppercorn, which means very little or no money per year, up to several £100s per year. Typically in our area now in London SW16, the average ground rent is probably £200 per annum, but in some cases could be £400 or £500 per year, but that could go right down to peppercorn. That's fixed in your lease. It's an annual requirement, sometimes billed twice yearly, and is quite distinct from the service charge. Now the service charge does what it says on the tin really. We were talking earlier about how if you're in a block of flats you can't by definition own everything and services have to be provided. Well, a good example of those services would be the buildings insurance, or maybe the cleaning of the windows, could be the gardening, that sort of thing. All those things have to be paid for, and the what ifs, for instance, what if the roof falls down? Who's going to pay to have it repaired? And of course the answer is written in the lease, and it's a proportion of the service charge. Maybe if you own 1/10 of the building, it could be a 10% of the final value of those works that you would be liable for. So that would be written into the lease.
So in terms of lease length, it's something that comes up quite a lot and it's quite important. What would you say is no longer kind of viable to get a mortgage, or even when it becomes a worry? In terms of length?
Very difficult question, lease length, and comes up time and time again. It does depend where you are, because of course central London is a separate issue on its own. But generally speaking, what we find is that when a lease is in excess of 70 years, it's not so much of a problem. Once you get down to the 70-year mark, sometimes 75 can cause issues. It is subjective, so that's why these figures are kind of varying up and down. And what happens is that the freeholder can extend your lease again, and there's a premium attached to the cost of that lease extension. So in answer to the question, I would say in general terms, a lease shorter than 75 years should raise an eyebrow and be a bit of a worry for people. Anything above that, you're safe for a while, but you might want to ask the question, because obviously if it falls within the time of your ownership that it will need renewing, it could still be a liability and a considerable expense for you as well.
So when should you start to sort of ask questions, or what questions should you ask when buying a property that's leasehold?
Yeah, there are some very important questions to ask. The first one is, how long is the lease? And when you ask that question, ask two questions actually. Ask first of all, how long is the lease and when is that from? Because the lease could be 99 years, but if it started in 1950, then it's not the same length as if it started this year. So very important to ask how long the lease is and when that lease started, or how long is remaining on the lease is the other way of asking that question. The second question, very important one, is the service charge, because this can be anything from a proportion of costs. In some conversion flats, what we have, if you imagine we have 2 flats in a building, it might be that they share equally any liabilities that come along but don't physically pay anything. And then you could flip that the other way and say, with some of our very large buildings here in Norbury, they have things like lifts, further services, maybe a gym, concierge. These things have to be paid for within the service charges, and therefore those service charges can be considerable and can have a considerable impact on your budget. So you need to ask the question, what is the service charge per annum? That's the first half of the question. And there is a second part to that question, and that is, are there any upcoming charges that I should know about? Because sometimes a lift might be towards the end of its useful life and it will need replacing, and the managing agents may say to the leaseholders, look, in the next year we're replacing the lifts, and they can actually place a very large bill on you for a proportion of the costs of that. So you need to consider that before you get to that point. Doesn't mean you shouldn't buy the flat, but you should certainly be aware of anything the leaseholder's aware of in that regard.
Okay, so in terms of leasehold properties in comparison to freehold, should I be put off buying a freehold in comparison to leasehold, or
other way around? Yeah, should you be put off buying a leasehold? No, yeah. I don't think you should, and here's why. Here in London, to buy a freehold property is very expensive, so for the average first-time buyer, flats are the only way forward. And I would say don't be intimidated or scared by the prospect of leasehold, because if the lease is relatively long and the service charge is fair, then there's no reason why that won't sell on readily in the future. So I don't think you should be scared of leasehold, and I think it's important to realise that leases are not just put there as a mechanism by which to stitch you up. They are put there for a reason, and it's actually for your own protection. In fact, some mortgagees won't actually mortgage properties. In fact, generally they won't mortgage properties that are flats within a building with no lease, because it says nothing about who's going to pay for what when it comes to the services, and that gives them a problem in terms of the ongoing maintenance costs for the building. So what I would say is, don't be put off by the idea of buying a flat, but do ask the right questions. How long is the lease? What is the service charges? Any upcoming charges? And if the service charges are quite high, have a look around the building, Say to yourself, well, okay, if I'm paying this money, but actually I've got a gym, concierge, underground parking like we have in buildings like Solent Court or Anderson Heights, of course the charges there are higher, but they have facilities which justify those charges, which people are happy to pay for. If you take some other blocks where the service charges are considerably high and they don't offer similar services, then those flats should be cheaper for that reason. So you've got to weigh all these things up.
So I think that's covered kind of leasehold properties quite well. Now I think we'll move on to SW16 and latest kind of market reactions.
Yeah.
How's it going so far?
Yeah, plenty of instructions this month. It's great news. The market is a bit slower, of course, but we expect that. It's holiday season. What we find is that now, with the schools broken up, mum and dad go away, they take the children with them. When they're not away, they're with the children, enjoying days out in the park and the like. And frankly, the last thing on their mind is moving house. September is when the market really hots up again, in my experience, what I call the mum's market. We speak about this a lot, don't we, James?
Yeah.
And this is something we'll come on to later, but it's about when the kids go back to school. Mum and dad are feeling a bit cramped now. Their kids are a little bit bigger, and their bikes and all their toys and everything are that a little bit bigger too, and they consider a move, and they want to get into their new home before Christmas, and Christmas tends to be a pivotal point. So what we find is August it quietens down. This year's no different. It's going to be quiet. Yes, the volumes are down, but actually, having said that, the supply is down too, so any good quality property is still selling, and I think it's a really good time to buy because you can negotiate harder than perhaps you could have done in a bullish rising market.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. It has kind of dropped off a bit, but we're still kind of getting along just as any other August, really.
Yeah.
It's not too far off what we've seen in the past. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think also, this is the market where just sticking it on the internet and waiting and hoping is no longer enough, and that's why you need a local feet on the ground estate agent, not just about putting it on the internet and waiting, but being proactive, seeing what they can do to enhance marketing, thinking about those applicants and those investors that have just walked in that might consider the area, and people just like you that might watch this YouTube video and think, I might consider investing in that area, sounds like a good place to be, and it is. So therefore, make sure you're on with an agent that is proactive and working with you to achieve the best price, and that doesn't mean just chuck it on the internet and hope. So that's it, wrapping up for this week. Thanks very much for watching, and if you have any questions, do post them below and we'll be happy to answer where we can.